I guess I'll get straight to it. My dad passed away 3 years ago when I was 28. I was working for a tech company and had been there for about 6 years. Dad remarried when I was 22 to Linda, who had a son from her previous marriage named Marcus. Marcus was about my age, maybe a year younger. We never really clicked, but weren't hostile either. Just kind of existed in the same space during family gatherings. Dad and I had a complicated relationship. He was old school, wanting me to stay close to home and take over his small construction business, following the traditional path. When I got the opportunity to work abroad, he wasn't thrilled, but he eventually came around. We talked maybe once a month, and I visited during major holidays. Not perfect, but we were working on it. The house in question is my childhood home in the suburbs. Dad bought it when I was 5, and it's where I grew up. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, decent sized backyard, nothing fancy but solid. The neighborhood had gotten better over the years and property values had gone up. Dad always said it would be mine someday, but you know how those casual comments go. I never thought much about it legally. When Dad got sick, I flew back immediately. Cancer, and it moved fast. Linda was handling a lot of the day-to-day care, and honestly, I was grateful. I took leave from work and stayed for his last 2 months. During that time, Dad seemed pretty out of it from the medication, and Linda was very much in charge of everything. She handled the funeral arrangements, dealt with his business affairs, all of it. I was grieving and overwhelmed, so I let her take the lead. After the funeral, Linda mentioned that Dad had left everything to her, which seemed normal since they were married. She said I was welcome to take any personal items I wanted. I grabbed some photos, his watch, a few books. I asked about the house and she said Dad had wanted her to have it, so she'd be secure, but that I could come and visit any time. It stung a little, but I figured Dad knew what he was doing and Linda had been good to him. I went back to work and just tried to move on. Linda and I texted occasionally, just checking in. She mentioned she was thinking about selling the house because it was too big for her alone. I said I understood. Then about a year later, she said she decided to keep it and let Marcus live there, since he was getting serious with his girlfriend. Again, not thrilled, but what could I do? Here's where it gets interesting. About 6 months ago, I got a call from Dad's old lawyer, Mr. Peterson. He was retiring and transferring files, and he wanted to make sure I had copies of Dad's will and other important documents. I told him Linda had handled everything, but he seemed confused. He said he'd mail me copies of everything just to be safe. When I got the documents, I nearly choked on my coffee. According to the will, Dad had left the house specifically to me. Not just the house, but also his life insurance policy and about $80,000 in savings that I never knew about. Linda got his business, his truck, and some other assets, but the house was definitely mine. The will was dated 2 years before he died, so it wasn't some last-minute change. I called Mr. Peterson immediately and he confirmed that, yes, this was Dad's final will and that he'd never been contacted about the estate. He seemed genuinely concerned and asked if I wanted him to look into it. I said yes. And he did some digging. Turns out Linda had never actually probated the will. She'd just taken over Dad's accounts using her rights as his spouse, but legally, the estate had never been properly settled. My mind was racing. I realized Linda had basically just decided to ignore the will and hope I'd never find out. Since I was abroad and didn't seem interested in challenging anything, she probably thought she was in the clear. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how calculated it all was. She'd been so helpful and understanding, positioning herself as the responsible one, handling everything while I was too grief-stricken to ask questions. I could have confronted her right away, but something made me pause. Maybe it was anger, maybe it was curiosity, but I wanted to see how far she'd take this. I started paying more attention to her social media posts and staying in touch more regularly. She was posting about renovations to the house, talking about how excited she was to give Marcus and his fiancée Sarah a beautiful home as a wedding gift. The wedding was planned for this past month. Over the next few months, I watched as Linda spent what had to be thousands of dollars renovating the house. New kitchen, updated bathrooms, fresh paint throughout, new flooring, landscaping, the works. She was documenting it all on Facebook, talking about how proud she was to be able to do this for her son. Marcus was posting about how grateful he was to have such a generous mom and how this was going to be the perfect start to his marriage. The wedding was planned for the first weekend of this month. I made sure to plan a trip back to Ohio for the week before, telling Linda I wanted to visit and maybe attend the wedding if it was okay. She was thrilled, saying how wonderful it would be to have me there and how she'd love to show me all the improvements she'd made to the house. I flew back to Ohio and stayed at a hotel, telling Linda I didn't want to impose. First day I was back, she gave me a tour of the house. And I have to admit, she'd done a beautiful job. The place looked amazing, probably better than it ever had. She was so proud, showing me every detail, talking about how Dad would have loved seeing the house this way. The irony wasn't lost on me. The day before the wedding, I made my move. I'd already been in contact with a local attorney who specialized in estate law. We'd prepared everything. I showed up at the house that morning with my lawyer and the legal documents. Linda answered the door, and I could see the confusion on her face when she saw us. I told her we needed to talk about Dad's estate. She immediately got defensive, saying everything had been handled properly and that she didn't understand what I was talking about. And that's when my lawyer stepped in and presented her with copies of the real will and the probate documents we'd filed. The look on her face was something I'll never forget. First, confusion, then recognition, and then panic. She started saying there must be some mistake, that Dad had told her the house was hers, that she'd been taking care of everything just like he wanted. My lawyer explained that, regardless of what Dad might have said, his will was clear and the house belonged to me. Linda completely lost it. She started crying and then screaming, saying I was being cruel and vindictive, that I was trying to ruin Marcus's wedding, that I was dishonoring my father's memory. She kept saying that she'd put so much work and money into the house that it wasn't fair for me to just swoop in and take it. Marcus came over during the commotion. When he realized what was happening, he was furious. He accused me of being jealous and petty, of waiting until the last minute to maximize the drama. He said I was destroying his wedding and his future, that I was being selfish since I lived in another country anyway. I explained that I tried to be respectful by letting them finish the renovations before asserting my legal rights, and that I was grateful for all the improvements they'd made to my property. Linda started demanding I pay her back for all the renovation costs, saying she'd kept receipts and that I owed her at least $40,000. My lawyer told them they had 30 days to vacate the property and that any renovation costs were their responsibilities since they'd made improvements to a property they didn't own. Linda was screaming that she'd fight it, that she'd prove Dad intended for her to have the house. But my lawyer just said she was welcome to try. The wedding went on as planned the next day, but obviously the mood was pretty tense. I didn't attend, figuring my presence would just make things worse. Since then, Linda has been calling and texting me constantly, alternating between begging me to reconsider and threatening to sue me. She's hired her own lawyer, but from what I understand, they basically told her she doesn't have a case. She's been posting on social media about how ungrateful and cruel I am, how I'm dishonoring my father's memory, the whole victim routine. Marcus and Sarah have been looking for a new place to live, and from what I hear, they're pretty bitter about the whole situation. They've been telling people that I deliberately sabotaged their wedding and their future, that I'm a vindictive person who couldn't stand to see them happy. Thing is, I don't really feel guilty about how this played out. Linda made a conscious choice to ignore Dad's will and essentially steal my inheritance. She gambled that I'd never find out or wouldn't care enough to fight it. The fact that she spent money renovating the house doesn't change the fact that she was spending money on property that wasn't hers. At the same time, I'm wondering if I should have handled this differently. Maybe I should have confronted her as soon as I found out about the will. Maybe waiting until after the renovations and right before the wedding was unnecessarily cruel. I keep going back and forth on whether I was justified in my approach or if I let my anger get the better of me. I'm also dealing with the practical aspects of this whole mess. I'm still living abroad and now I own a house in Ohio that I'm not sure what to do with. I could sell it, but the market's not great right now. I could rent it out, but managing a rental property from another country seems complicated. I could move back, but I built a life far away from home that I'm not ready to give up. The family drama is also weighing on me. Linda's side of the family is pretty much done with me. Some of Dad's old friends have been cold when I've reached out. I understand their perspective. From the outside, it probably looks like I swooped in and destroyed a family over money. But they don't know the full story. I'm not sure how much I should try to explain. I guess what I'm struggling with is whether I did the right thing and whether I handled it the right way. Linda wronged me, but maybe I took it too far in how I got my revenge. I'm also wondering what Dad would think about all this. He always said family was important, but he also believed in doing the right thing legally and ethically. So I'm putting this out there. Am I the a-hole for how I handled this situation? Should I have been more direct from the beginning? Was waiting until after the renovations too petty? What should I do now about the house and the ongoing family drama? Update 1. I didn't expect my original post to get so much attention, but I'm grateful for everyone who weighed in. Most people agreed I wasn't wrong to reclaim my inheritance. Though many questioned the timing, after reflecting, I can see their point. I was legally right, and Linda definitely wronged me, but I could have handled things with more maturity. Since then, Linda's lawyer contacted mine to see if I'd consider selling the house to her at a reduced price or setting up a payment plan to reimburse her for renovations. Legally, I didn't owe her anything, but I wanted to be fair. She did invest in the house, even if she wasn't entitled to it, so I made a counteroffer. I'd sell it to her for market value minus documented renovation costs. She rejected it instantly. Through her lawyer, she claimed Dad had promised her the house and that she was honoring his wishes. She still thinks she can prove he wanted her to have it, despite the will clearly leaving it to me. Things escalated from there, Linda telling everyone I'm greedy and vindictive, painting herself as the victim while omitting the part where she hid my father's will. Marcus, her son, has been harassing me on social media, calling me names, saying I ruined his life, blaming me for the fact that he and Sarah had to move in with her parents. He says I should have just let them keep the house since I don't even live in the country. What's frustrating is that neither of them sees what they did as wrong. Linda insists she was just taking care of the family, but that doesn't justify hiding a legal document and taking what wasn't hers. Marcus is angry, but he's not acknowledging that the house wasn't theirs to begin with. Meanwhile, I've been dealing with practical issues. The house is empty now, and I'm paying for utilities and insurance from another city. I'm looking into property managers, but it's turning out to be more complicated than expected. Some unexpected support has come through, though. My Uncle Jim reached out after hearing what happened. He's always found it strange that Dad would leave everything to Linda when he used to talk about me inheriting the house. He said he didn't want to interfere back then, but had always been uncomfortable with how she handled the estate. A few of Dad's old friends have also reached out. Turns out Linda's story hasn't been consistent. She's told some people there was a different will, others that Dad made a verbal promise, and others still that I'm just contesting a legitimate inheritance. As more people learn the truth, her version of events is unraveling. I won't lie, the stress has been wearing on me. I've been losing sleep, struggling to focus at work. Sometimes I wonder if I should just sell the house and walk away. I don't need the money. And I never wanted to be a landlord, but then I think about Dad. He worked hard for that house and chose to leave it to me. Giving up now would feel like letting Linda win and disregarding his wishes. So I've decided to give her one final chance to accept my offer. If she doesn't, I'll put the house on the market and move on. I'm also considering legal action for the initial fraud, though I'm unsure if it's worth the emotional and financial toll. For now, I've reclaimed what's rightfully mine, and that might be enough. Update 2. Things have taken a dramatic turn since my last update. I'm writing this from a hotel room in Ohio after flying back unexpectedly. As expected, Linda rejected my final offer and doubled down, claiming the house was rightfully hers and demanding I pay her legal fees. My lawyer laughed it off and I moved ahead with listing the house. We listed it for $320,000 and within 2 days we had 3 offers. One at asking price. I was relieved and ready to move on. The buyers, a young couple with kids, seemed excited, but then Linda completely lost it. During a scheduled walkthrough, she barged into the house screaming that it wasn't for sale and the buyers needed to leave. She claimed I was selling the house illegally. The buyers left, understandably shaken. Linda then barricaded herself inside. Police were called. After reviewing the legal documents my lawyer provided, they saw she had no claim. But it got worse. Linda had secretly been staying in the house ever since Marcus and Sarah moved out. The neighbors assumed she still lived there. She refused to leave, saying she'd invested too much to walk away. The police gave her 24 hours before they'd forcefully remove her. My lawyer suggested I fly back to handle it in person before the buyers pulled out, so I did. When I got to the house, she looked disheveled, exhausted. She immediately started yelling that I was heartless, that I was destroying her family, and that the house was rightfully hers. I tried reasoning with her, even re-extending the previous offer, market value minus renovation costs, but she refused, insisting Dad had promised her the house. She claimed he changed his mind during his final days, but never updated his will because he was medicated and didn't want to hurt me. That excuse was absurd. Dad was meticulous about legal documents. If he wanted to change the will, he would have. Her story just didn't add up. I told her she had until the morning to leave or the police would remove her. She said she'd rather be arrested than give up the house. Next morning, the police and my lawyer met me at the property. Linda didn't answer the door, so they used my key. We found her sitting on the floor in the master bedroom, surrounded by photo albums. She looked defeated and said she needed time to say goodbye. The officers were patient, and I told her she could take any of Dad's personal items she wanted. She was surprised by my offer and quietly packed a few boxes. Before leaving, she said she was sorry things turned out this way, but still believed Dad had wanted her to have the house. I did feel a pang of sympathy, but ultimately she created this mess by hiding the will and squatting in a house that wasn't hers. If she'd been honest from the beginning, we might have worked something out. Thankfully, the buyers still wanted the house and the sale closed that same day. I'm relieved to finally be done with it all, but I feel conflicted. Linda clearly has some mental health issues, and part of me wonders if I could have handled things with more compassion. Still, she made deliberate choices, and I don't think I was wrong for standing my ground. Marcus has been posting online about how I've destroyed their family, made his mom homeless. He's ignoring the fact that all this happened because she tried to steal my inheritance. I thought about defending myself publicly, but I think it's better to just move on. I fly back tomorrow. The money will help, but more than anything, I'm just relieved it's over. I keep thinking about Dad and hope he'd understand I only ever wanted to honor his wishes. Update 3. I'm back in London now, and I thought this whole situation was finally over. I was wrong. Something happened yesterday that I never could have predicted. I'm honestly not sure how to process it all. I got a call from Uncle Jim, who said he needed to talk to me about something important related to Dad's estate. He sounded serious, so I figured it was probably about Linda or maybe some paperwork I'd missed. I was not prepared for what he actually told me. Apparently, Jim had been going through some of Dad's old papers that Linda had given him after the funeral. She told him they were just business documents and old bills, nothing important. But Jim finally got around to looking through them, and he found something that changes everything. There was a handwritten letter from Dad to me, dated about 2 months before he died. In it, Dad explained that he knew his time was limited and that he wanted me to know his true feelings about the inheritance. He said he'd always intended for me to have the house, but that he was worried about Linda's financial security after he was gone. The letter explained that Dad had been planning to set up a trust that would let Linda live in the house for the rest of her life, but that ownership would transfer to me after her death. He'd been working with Mr. Peterson on the legal details, but he got sicker faster than expected and never got to finalize the arrangement. Dad wrote that he hoped I'd be willing to work something out with Linda so she wouldn't be left homeless, but that he also wanted me to know the house was meant to be mine, ultimately. He said he'd tried to talk to Linda about his plans, but that she'd gotten upset and said she didn't want to be a burden on anyone. The letter also contained something that made my blood run cold. Dad had suspected that Linda might try to hide his will or manipulate the inheritance situation. He wrote that he'd noticed her asking questions about his legal documents and that she'd been evasive when he tried to discuss his estate planning with her. He specifically instructed me to make sure Mr. Peterson handled the probate process and not to let Linda convince me that she could take care of everything. He said he loved Linda, but that he didn't completely trust her when it came to money matters, especially after she'd had financial problems in her previous marriage. Reading this letter was like getting a message from beyond the grave. Dad had basically predicted exactly what Linda would do, and he tried to warn me about it. The fact that she'd hidden this letter along with the will shows that she knew exactly what she was doing when she decided to steal my inheritance. But here's the thing that's really messing with my head. Dad had wanted me to take care of Linda. He'd expected me to be the bigger person and make sure she was okay, even if she tried to cheat me. And instead, I basically left her homeless and humiliated. I called Uncle Jim back and asked him to scan the letter and send it to me. Reading it again, I could hear Dad's voice in every word. He'd been trying to find a way to take care of both of us, and his biggest fear was that we'd end up fighting over his estate, which is exactly what happened. I spent most of yesterday thinking about what Dad would want me to do now. The house is sold, so I can't offer Linda the original arrangement he'd wanted. But I have the money from the sale. I could potentially help her get back on her feet. At the same time, I'm still angry about how she handled everything. She didn't just ignore Dad's will, she actively hid evidence of his wishes and tried to manipulate me into giving up my inheritance. The fact that Dad had suspected she might do this doesn't make it okay that she actually did it. I decided to call Linda directly. I wasn't sure if she'd even answer, but she picked up on the second ring. She sounded tired and defeated, nothing like the combative person I'd been dealing with for weeks. I told her about the letter, and there was a long silence on the other end. Finally, she said she remembered Dad mentioning something about a trust arrangement, but that she'd told him she didn't want to be dependent on me for housing. She said she'd been embarrassed about the idea of living in my house, even if she had legal rights to stay there. Linda admitted that when Dad died, she'd panicked about her financial situation and convinced herself he really wanted her to have the house outright. She said she'd found the letter, that had been too ashamed to mention it because it proved she'd been lying about Dad's intentions. She apologized for how she'd handled everything and said she understood why I was angry with her. She said she'd been desperate and had made bad choices, but that she knew it didn't excuse what she'd done. She also said she was sorry for the things Marcus had said about me and that she'd talked to him about stopping the social media attacks. I found myself in a weird position. I was still hurt and angry about the deception, but I could also understand her desperation. Dad had been supporting her financially. Suddenly, she was widowed with limited income and no clear future. Doesn't excuse the fraud, but it explains the motivation. I told Linda I needed some time to think about everything, but that I might be willing to help her figure out a housing situation. I made it clear this would be a gift, not something she was entitled to, and that it would depend on her being honest with me going forward. She started crying and thanking me, but I cut her off. I said I hadn't decided anything yet and that I needed to process what Dad had really wanted. I told her I'd call her back in a few days once I'd figured out what felt right. I've been coming back and forth on this ever since. Part of me thinks Linda made her bed and should lie in it. She committed fraud, lied to me for years, and only came clean when she got caught. Why should I reward that behavior? But another part of me thinks about what Dad would want. He'd loved Linda enough to marry her and wanted to provide for her. He'd also loved me enough to leave me his most valuable asset. Maybe the right thing to do is to find a way to honor both of those feelings. I'm thinking about offering to help Linda with a down payment on a small house or condo, something she could afford on her own income. It wouldn't be as nice as the house she lost, but it would give her stability and independence. I could also potentially help with some of the legal fees she's incurred, since this whole mess has been expensive for everyone. I don't know if this makes me a pushover or if it's just the right thing to do. I keep wondering what Dad would think about how I've handled everything. Would he be proud that I fought for my inheritance? Or disappointed that I let the situation get so messy? I'm also worried about setting a precedent. If I help Linda now, am I essentially saying that her behavior was okay? Will Marcus and his family expect me to help them too? I don't want to enable more manipulation or bad behavior. At the same time, I keep thinking about that letter and how Dad had tried to plan for exactly this situation. He'd wanted me to be the responsible one, the one who made sure everyone was taken care of. Maybe that's what being the bigger person really means. I'm going to call Linda back tomorrow and see if she's interested in working something out. I'm not going to give her everything she wants, but maybe I can find a way to help her get back on her feet while still maintaining appropriate boundaries. I never thought I'd be in a position where I was considering helping someone who tried to steal from me, but I guess that's what family drama does to you. Dad always said that doing the right thing wasn't always easy, and I'm starting to understand what he meant. I'll update again if anything significant happens, but hopefully this is the beginning of the end of this whole mess. I just want to move forward and honor Dad's memory in a way that would make him proud, even if I'm not sure what that looks like. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.